This is episode 136 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we got several news items this week to contemplate and discuss, and one of what I think is the most interesting news items involves a investigation right here from the Rio Grande Foundation involving some staffers' attendance at I hate to say the term anti-energy, but there are genuinely now people on the left who, as Greta Thunberg and 350.org and some of these groups show, genuinely anti-energy. They are anti any of that stuff.
Yes, and it is such a fascinating thing to watch. You know, it's one of those, in terms of if we're going to live in a modern economy, being anti-energy is almost like being anti-water, anti-food, anti-clothing, anti-shelter, anti-fun, anti-anything. And whether you think that oil and gas and coal should be stricken from the earth, to do that in the short term would be beyond anything that climate change could ever do in terms of wreaking havoc, death, and destruction on our planet. It's crazy, but it is almost become a religion now amongst many people that, we're against energy and it's the bad thing and it's the boogeyman, and so we got to get rid of it.
You got it. And the group that a few of Michelle Lujan Grisham's top staffers went off to hang out with, if you will, in New York City. Again,
They walked.
Yes, I'm sure they walked.
They walked, maybe not first class, but they walked into the airport and flew.
We would have definitely heard if they walked, but they did not. I'm sure they flew on some nice jet fuel propelled airlines, probably even not coach. I'm going to venture to say that maybe they flew first class, but I have no information to confirm or deny that particular assessment. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund is the group funding the conference. Rockefeller, of course, famously known for his work in the oil and gas industry. Just
Standard Oil, the successor to, I believe, the ExxonMobil, if I remember my history correctly.
Well, actually,
is that right?
Most they had to be broken up, but
Yes,
were
there you
broken
go,
up.
yeah.
And many of the oil companies today
Came from Standard Oil.
directly out of that breakup. So anyway, that's a whole different story. There are books written about that, including, I would just throw out there, The Prize by one Daniel Yergin. It is a very worthwhile read about the history of the oil industry. That's not where we're going today, folks. The two Lujan Grisham staffers are Sarah Cottrell Probst, Secretary of the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. So we're not
Potentially the anti-energy minerals and
Yes.
natural resources department in the future.
And Sandra Eli, Director of New Mexico Environmental Protection Division. And this conference, again, in New York, with funding put up by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. This is a group, by the way, that has financially supported campaigns against the Keystone XL pipeline, in favor of fossil fuel divestment, that being kind of a page taken out of the BDS movement, which is an effort at universities and among some on the left to try to get companies to divest from Israel. In this case, it is a way for universities and others that have these funds, state funds like the permanent funds of New Mexico, to divest from fossil fuels because of their alleged moral shortcomings. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund funds the Georgetown University Climate Center and other organizations like 350.org, which right on their website talks about eliminating fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, coal, the whole 9 yards. So this was actually back in July. So this is relatively recent history. And These folks from New Mexico, high-level staffers with the Lujan Grisham administration, flew off and went to talk about things like banning, and I'm not saying this is happening here now, but it's happening in California and happened already, banning the implementation or inclusion of natural gas hookups in new home construction. Did you know that that is a new thing, Walter?
Oh, yeah, I did. It's I believe it's the Bay Area. Berkeley, I believe, has already done that, if I'm correct. And what's fascinating is just to put that whole issue into perspective, California is now backing away from shutting down natural gas power plants as soon as they had, quote, planned to do it, much like New Mexico under the Energy Transition Act, because they're realizing that the lights may go out and prices may go beyond what even the people in California that are used to, taking a huge bath when it comes to energy costs. The other thing that's fascinating about that one is if you're going to replace, there's this thing called the Carnot cycle that's the maximum efficiency to convert natural gas or another energy source into electricity. And so you take that, put line loss in, put the inefficiency of electric heat relative to gas, odds are for the foreseeable future, you will use more fossil fuel with this ban than if you didn't have the ban, if you just burn natural gas to begin with. So it's craziness that's out there. I watched a YouTube video a number of years about where does the electricity in your home come from? And this was a spoof, but it's like, this is really the state of the thinking energy-wise on a lot of these. It comes from the outlet in my bedroom and in my kitchen. That's where it comes from. Not that there's a nuclear power plant, a coal-fired, natural gas, some wind and solar hooked up, some geothermal, some water, hydroelectric. But it's like, hey, people, there's no free lunch here, and these things are not the brightest. And I think that one would be just crazy talk for California and even New Mexico.
Yeah, to be clear, in a few California cities, efforts funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund have contributed to new homes being prohibited from including for your hot water heater natural gas, for your stove natural gas, for anything in the home, for cooking your stove natural gas. So just very, very extreme stuff. I mean, if you had asked me even a decade or so ago if these are the kinds of things that would be talked about by the environmental movement, I wouldn't really have believed you. It's just amazing how far down the path towards totalitarianism and micromanaging of your day-to-day life these people want to control. And I think, you can read our press release, a lot of information there beyond just the usual, including a lot of interesting links. errorsoфenchantment.com is where the story is posted, and I think it's really worth questioning. The broader question is, what are the governor's true intentions in terms of oil and gas? We know she loves the money, but people who not just support the industry, but arguably say it's a necessary evil, kind of take that perspective, don't send top staffers to conferences to discuss ways to eliminate natural gas from those kinds of basic everyday uses for people in their state.
Yeah, and then the only other possible explanation, it's amazing how when our governors run for the post of governor of New Mexico, they talk about how much they love the state and how much they want to improve it, but Governor Lujan Grisham's getting attention, a possible vice presidential candidate, and for those of you listening, Paul's eyes rolled when I said that. So I don't know if you heard that, but it's one of those things that is this part of the woke checklist that a vice presidential candidate would have to go through to be vetted in the 2019 time period, getting ready for the 2020 election, where it's just like, where you talked about the things on the environmental side, who would have thought that there would be some of the proposals they have on the economic side as well? It's all coming boiling forth in terms of an ever increasing amount of, total government control in every aspect of the economy, whether it be energy, education, healthcare. Are we going to have price controls? I saw the other day a proposal nationally to bring national rent control.
Bernie Sanders, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I believe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brought that as well. And then I wish I would have looked up the quote, but, there was a quote about what rent control, the impacts of rent control in Europe tended to be similar to that of being bombed during World War II. You can destroy cities by rent control. The thing you want is affordable housing. So instead of making more housing affordable, you actually go the other way and choke off investment and make it harder for people to invest, and then wonder why things don't work out properly.
Yeah. Last point on this issue. This is not, we're not jumping to conclusions or anything. The governor did not misinterpret what this conference was all about. There was a lot of information requests done to find out information about this conference. A background memo was sent to all attendees prior to the event. And this is a direct quote. The top line challenge-opportunity is to move away from the use of natural gas in buildings as a first priority. So this effort to move buildings away from natural gas is the first priority, then electricity and industry, while simultaneously moving quickly, see if this sounds familiar, to move transportation systems off petroleum. There's a little connection there between the governor's proposal to more than double the fleet average in terms of miles per gallon within just a few scant years till in 2022. You suspect that she might already be taking on some of the issues put forth by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and these extreme left-wing anti-energy folks to really push hard on this issue.
Yes, and as we talked a little bit in our previous podcast with regard to the mile per gallon goals that she set. When you do things like the Energy Transition Act, it's kind of in the future, and she will probably moved on to other things before all of that pain and suffering is felt, and we have to deal with undoing that. But these things can come around very quickly. And if people, it reminds me of in the 70s when they started to put catalytic converters on cars. It made the price of automobiles go up. It made the miles per gallon go down. Actually, it was technology that was forced well beyond what it was available for and what it was capable of doing. And as we talked last time, I really want to see what the two things, over-the-road trucking and pickup trucks, those, and I guess the third are sport utility vehicles. Will there be any carve out for that, or are we just going to just overnight try to go there and things are going good? Let's bankrupt our economy. Let's shut down movement of freight. That'll be good. That's a good
only
idea.
If you are transporting windmill turbines, that is a clear pass for use of fossil fuels.
Yeah, because they do use diesel to haul them. I see them every day. If you're not, it doesn't matter.
Wind turbines or solar panels, then you're SOL. So, all right. Well, on to kind of another batch of lefties in New Mexico, this time locally here in Albuquerque. And it is October. We are just coming up very soon on the election in November and early voting getting going. We at the Rio Grande Foundation, including recent show guest Pat Rogers, have eagerly and persistently been attempting to get a public debate discussion going with folks on the left, Common Cause, Ole, numerous other organizations, Eric Griego's Working Families Party, other, it's basically a who's who of leftist groups around Albuquerque who are standing up to support this so-called democracy dollars. And I'm not going to go into all the details. If you want to find out all about democracy dollars, I would encourage you to go listen to the podcast that we did a few weeks ago with Pat Rogers, in which he eviscerates the topic of democracy dollars and explains all the issues with it. Basically, this is the voucher program to allow anybody, presumably, children, dogs, illegal immigrants, whoever, to take these vouchers and go ahead and use them to support various candidates for local office. That's episode 129, folks. You can check it out of the podcast. But we have been trying to get these folks to debate, and they will not debate the issue. Pat, I know, is personally very frustrated about this, but we want to make sure our listeners know that we are trying to get information out into the media and share the problem of the left not wanting to debate. They think they can use their grassroots might, their grass tops, or whatever it is, their money, their superior financial resources, to pull one over on the voters walking into the polls on election day without a whole heck of a lot of information and turn out their base and push this through. I am hoping that the other side, folks who, not just conservative, but people who are suspicious of these newfangled kind of approaches to things, that just changing for change's sake, that they will get to the polls and oppose this harebrained scheme of democracy dollars. And please do check out that podcast, episode 129, with Pat Rogers, local attorney and all-around good guy who's trying to educate the people against this. But the left will not engage in a debate. So they're right there exposing themselves as not living up to what they purport to believe.
Well, and you said something I thought about a lot about this issue this morning. I was reading some emails flying around about it, and I think you hit the nail on the head. The left relative to the right in New Mexico tends to have a better funded, more well built out grassroots organization. That doesn't mean that more voters agree with them in every case, but they have the organization that can be mobilized very quickly and very effectively relative to the more conservative forces of smaller government crowd, of which there's a significant amount in New Mexico as well. What this does is that takes that advantage in grassroots and ratchets it up. It leverages it up because basically, it reminded me of I've been at golf tournaments where you buy these tickets for raffle items and you put your ticket in the bucket and then they pull out one for a trip for golf in Rio Doso. In that case, everyone has the same option to get that. But to get these vouchers, you're going to need to be going door to door and having events. And so the ability to raise money, which does not come from thin air, it will come from taxpayers. It's the money that you pay in your gross receipts tax every time you buy something at the store that the city of Albuquerque will then take and give to these candidates. And then just one point about the Pat Rogers interview, which almost caused my head to hit the desk in fright, is the estimates that for every dollar that's given to candidates to spend in this, they think that it could be equal another dollar in administration. And so think about that in terms of inefficient. They talk about how inefficient healthcare was under the health insurance system, and we can make it better with this national healthcare plan that we have in place. Didn't work out very well. But to have, even going into it, think that it could cost $1 to give $1 for campaigning. Oh, yeah, and the taxpayers pay for it all. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a good idea to me, but the fact is, hopefully people will see through it and vote it down. But I think they're relying on that grassroots effort. Why should we debate with logic and facts and potential impacts when we can just try to get our supporters out to support this thing and maybe slip it under the radar of people asleep at the wheel here in Albuquerque?
Yeah, well, There's so many different points to make on that topic and on that wavelength. We published, it wasn't our graphic, but it was a graphic put out by left-wing groups who were organizing a May Day event. May Day, of course, being the communist holiday, and there is a array of logos. I mean, I'm talking 40 different logos, and I pulled it up right here. Southwest Organizing Project, Albuquerque Teachers Federation, AFT, El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos, Central New Mexico Labor Council, OLE, Sierra Club, Enlace, Equality New Mexico, Center for Peace and Justice of Albuquerque, Center on Law and Poverty, Voices for Children, Planned Parenthood, and I'm talking just a fraction, Working Families, Partnership for Community Action, Enlace Comunitario, Generation Justice. I can go on and on and on. And each of these organizations has resources that, well, in the case of the Albuquerque Teachers Federation, I mean, dwarf Rio Grande Foundation, OLE even, much more kind of similar organization, except for more C4, much greater resources than the Rio Grande Foundation. Voices for Children, the most similar probably, another think tank. Also, you look at their 990 forms and you find out that their annual budget is 3, 4, 5 times that of the Rio Grande Foundation. And then you see the numbers, the various groups, and just how many groups there are on this chart. ACLU. I could go on and on. The litany would, being Catholic, you go to the litany at church and you hear all the saints' names read out. This is the opposite. But it's the fact is that there are so many of them, and there are few groups on the right, but even the groups that fund, or the people that fund groups on the right, take oil and gas, which everybody on the left thinks is the
devil incarnate.
They are right up there with the Koch brothers for everything that's bad about groups like the Rio Grande Foundation. I'll tell you what, I know this is a deep, dark secret for a lot of folks, but the oil and gas industry doesn't necessarily care about democracy dollars. They care about the oil and gas industry.
Right.
And even, for example, the recent push by the governor to go for 50 plus miles to the gallon, when the news media came calling for comments from NMOGA and other oil and gas aligned groups, they did not provide a comment. That was what I would call a shot across the bow of the oil and gas industry. But it's the very wise political choices. And I do think Michelle Lujan Grisham is a smart politician, even if I disagree with her. Rather than going, say, a fracking ban, which drives a stake at the heart of oil and gas production and revenue generation in New Mexico, doing something like going to 50 plus miles to the gallon is broadly targeted at users of oil and gas, i.e. people who drive vehicles, but it does not directly attack the revenue generation or the industry itself here in New Mexico. So she can placate the radical left on being pro-renewables, anti-oil and gas, but she can also continue to see the money flow into the state's coffers. She's not dumb. You don't underestimate the intelligence of your political opposition. You have to understand that they are smart people. They may be evil, and I'm not saying the governor's evil, but she's definitely using her power in ways to get what she wants politically without cutting off her own, ear to spite her face kind of thing on the oil and gas industry. So really a fascinating approach, and just an illustration of just how powerful the left is, especially in New Mexico, but really even in other states. They have much more in the way of resources.
Well, two points as you're reading through the litany of organizations. It's interesting how many types of organizations there are. There's the who of left organizations, whether it be economic, energy, social justice, everything. They're all coming together around these issues. And the thing that unites them is the desire for government to control things and the free market to have less power. I mean, they've said that. So it's basically socialist economics, and I don't know what you would call energy, their energy policy. It's just a means to an end, if you will. It seems like that's all coming together. And then regarding your point about the ability to be supportive of these fuel standards and et cetera without hurting the industry, you know, that's a distinct possibility given that New Mexico only has a couple million people. And so most of the energy that we produce is not consumed here. It's, you know, it goes to Texas, California, surrounding states. So yes, we use some of it here, absolutely, both in natural gas to heat our homes for the moment, and certainly gasoline and diesel fuel and the like. But much more of it is used elsewhere. So that is a reality there. Whereas if you were to do something like this in Texas, where you're using a lot and producing a lot, I think the political calculus may be much different. And as you said, you know, these groups, you know, there was not that long ago that Texas was considered a very strong bastion of, you know, limited government, conservative politics. And there's talk there of things going the other way, moving in the other direction. So, yeah, these are large, you know, these are plate tectonics type forces at play. And New Mexico is interestingly right there with, you know, California, New York, Illinois, the big, populous, very liberal states with 2 million people going in the same direction. Oh, yes, and never having our heyday of huge economic growth like those states I just mentioned.
You got it, Wally. Well, I wish Alicia Keys would stick to singing songs about New York and not meddling in New Mexico's economy.
Yes.
I'm being silly.
It's a different Alicia Keys.
Yes, acting slightly dense there. Yes, the Alicia Keys, who is a famous singer, is not the same as the one who is cabinet secretary for New Mexico's Economic Development Department. And unfortunately, you know, that maybe we would be better with Alicia Keys, the singer. I don't know. Normally, we don't go through the Albuquerque Journal editorial pages and rant about each editorial or each article that runs in the journal or any other media source. But she wrote, the cabinet secretary wrote a piece in the guest column section, "Want results from film incentives? They're here." And this is, in some ways, and she mentions him in the text of her piece, she mentions Dick Mensner, who was a guest on the last episode, 135, so you don't have to go very, very far back into the archives to find Dick Mensner's discussion and interview about film incentives. And I'm not going to go point by point in her discussion, but Alicia Keys clearly fails to grasp, either willfully or due to the incentives afforded by a highly paid job in a relatively prominent position with the current administration. She is very slippery with the facts at best and willfully ignorant, I would say, at worst. And this is, of course, talking about film incentives. 8,000 people in New Mexico rely on film and television production, blah, 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 for their livelihood. Okay, that's great. I mean, these are just numbers thrown out of context that have no meaning. There's no discussion of alternatives. And I think that's the thing. Compared to what? When you hear a government official tout some subsidy or some government program, you have to ask, compared to what? Because she very much likes the film incentives. She supports them and makes her case, such as it is. Now, she does get one factual point wrong. She says that the discussion, the point used by Mensner and others about 40 cents on the dollar being the rate of return, it's technically 43. It's a film industry report from late 2014. I thought it was 2015, but you can go online and find it. She says that the data he used to critique the incentives is out of date with decades old analysis. Now, last time I checked, 2014 is not decades ago. It's closer to 5 years ago. So she...
And what was the real number she quoted?
There was no number.
That's exactly. So, and then, that the fact that those studies were done by the film industry, think if the oil and gas industry were to directly do a study about their impact, how much people would scream and shout. So it's one of those very interesting. And again, I know we've mentioned that podcast a lot, but it's Mr. Minster makes the points in a very methodical, well thought out way. And that's why I think she felt obliged to have to rebut that. But, and Paul, just so you know, I mean, I sent you an email. I produced that podcast, meaning I listened to it while it was happening live. This podcast also is played parts of it on KIVA radio. I happened to be listening to it, and I listened to it again, and it was better the second time. And I sent you an email and I said, that was good stuff. That was a rational, well thought out, and very good critique of film. Do we like film? Yes, we love film, but does it make sense economically for New Mexico? That is the question. To be or not to be, that is the question.
Well, of course, Ms. Keys was the city of Albuquerque's film liaison and an executive with Walt Disney Company. Again,
when you wish upon a star.
Well, you not only you're setting yourself up for cross purposes. It's kind of like an oil and gas executive being in charge of oil and gas rules and regulations in New Mexico. And I'm not saying those kinds of things don't happen on either side, because often the greatest experts on particular industries come from within those industries. But in this case, she is the proverbial person with a hammer to whom the whole world is a nail. And in her view of economic development, it really is driven through those industries that she has spent her whole life involved in. So unfortunately, it does not bode well for more serious fundamental economic reforms in the state of New Mexico. Now, we at the Rio Grande Foundation take a generally skeptical view of economic development professionals as a group, because the mindset of most economic developers, this is right, left, and center, is how many incentives can we get for a specific industry or business so that we can point to that specific business or industry and say, we did that. We built that, in the words of Obama. Whereas the actual way to develop a stronger economy includes, it requires real economic reforms and differences to be made in terms of tax policies, incentives that are more fundamental, like a zero income tax, like a regulatory structure that makes sense, like reform of the gross receipts tax, like a bond rating and a pension system that are sound and strong, that won't consume ever greater quantities of taxpayer dollars down the road. Unfortunately, I don't think that Lujan Grisham cares or is willing to take on these issues, and Ms. Keys is certainly not the person that's going to whisper in her ear and tell her, you got to do X, Y, and Z. She's going to say, oh, film is where it's at.
Well, and I often cite Henry Hazlitt to roughly paraphrase, is when you have concentrated benefits, i.e. ribbon cuttings for what your economic development programs did, and let's say your tax and the whole thing added 100 jobs, you have a ribbon cutting and see it's working, where if the 200 jobs that are lost because of that policy are diffused 1 or 2 per organization across your whole state, you don't see the net detriment that is happening. And that's one of the issues that was talked upon in the I think quite effectively by Dick Minsner in the last podcast. But that is right there. The whole issue of this film is also really part of that discussion as well. So ribbon cuttings are one thing, but the general impact on the entire economy not considered nearly as much as it probably should be.
I'm here with Cindy Glover. She is a data analyst with Crestline Promotional Products, and she has done some data crunching about consumers in the United States and whether they shop their values, both liberals and conservatives. And Cindy, this issue seems to have really taken off in recent years. What does the data show about folks around the United States, whether they're hardcore liberal Bernie voters or conservative Trump supporters, and they're voting or supporting companies, I should say, voting with their wallets in terms of their values?
Well, what we found, Paul, is that consumers care about company behavior. The question we started off with was how much do consumers really focus on company political stands or social values or positions on issues? And surprisingly, Americans are paying attention. They're tuned in. There's a lot of noise, so it's not everything matters to everybody. But 7 out of 10 Americans want to use their power as consumers to support companies that share their own values. Very, very few, only about 9%, are uninterested in the ethics of the companies they buy from.
Got it. And you break it down with the conservatives and liberals, and it looks like from a conservative perspective, according to the data, made in the United States is the number one concern for people on the right side of the political spectrum. As I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the left side, cruelty-free, not tested on animals is the thing that drives those folks the most. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, those are the two issues where politics really made a difference. That's where we see a big difference based on the color, the political color you align yourself with, red or blue. For both liberals and conservatives, non-toxic is the label that matters the most. And for both liberals and conservatives, organic really doesn't move the needle that much anymore. I don't know if it's a loss of confidence in whether something really truly is organic, but those are two labels of the many that we're all faced with every time we walk through a grocery store, where politics, people are united. Non-toxic is good, organic is but when we looked at the differences where liberals and conservatives part ways, Made in America had a huge difference in terms of how important it is to conservatives and how relatively unimportant it is to liberals. And, at the other end of the spectrum, while both people of both political persuasions prefer products that are not tested on animals and are cruelty-free, liberals put that higher than conservatives do. And the same thing with fair trade. Fair trade, it mattered to both, but was more important and scored higher with liberals.
Yeah, I was looking at the differential there, and you were correct. The
Sure.
non-toxic issue does resonate with both groups. Now, I'm looking at some of these issues, and you hear conservatives talking about guns. Did you consider guns and say like Starbucks and companies like that, or on the other side, abortion? Alyssa Milano, Hollywood star and political lightning rod, recently came out with a whole report about film industry and abortion laws. I don't see those in your report. Did you shy away from those because they're even more kind of lightning rods than the issues you look at, or do you have any other issue areas that you consider?
We were less focused, I think, on the issues than we were on the consumer decision making. And the idea that when you fill your cart, what do you feel good about? What do you feel guilty about? Do you go out of your way to avoid stores? We certainly, without naming names, because there was no benefit to that, we looked at things like chicken sandwiches and sneakers and, some of the companies that have been very high profile about their political issues. And one of the questions was, is that a turnoff? Would consumers prefer companies not wade into political territory? And ultimately, and of course you look at it from a free market perspective, if businesses felt that this was hurting the bottom line in a significant way, you would probably see a lot less of the very high-profile stand-taking that a lot of big brands have done. But the message has been pretty clear. Consumers do care. They don't all care about the same things, and they don't feel equally strongly about everything. But 3 out of 4 consumers regularly pay a little extra for goods that they feel better about, generally about 10% more. And 8 out of 10 consumers want to know if a company that makes one of their favorite products is doing something unethical, politically controversial, or harmful to the environment. So there's this push and pull between getting value for your money and following your values, whatever they may be. And people do pay attention to the news, and it does change their behavior. The thing that people are most likely to boycott a brand for was egregious environmental harm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that is most likely to get people shying away from your business. But treating employees badly was up there. Testing products on animals was up there. Interestingly, one of the least significant controversies that a company can have was allegations of sexual harassment by top managers. That was not something that a lot of people said would cause them to boycott a brand, or had to cause them to boycott a brand in the past.
Did you have any success in kind of parsing concern from the actual action of people and what they did? Because a lot of people say, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z, but when push comes to shove, they just can't live without whatever product they really like, whether it's chicken sandwiches or Starbucks or you name it. There's kind of a disconnect there. Did you were you able to figure anything out like that?
We did. One of the questions, and of course, when you're, we probed pretty deeply, but people are self-reporting, so that there's always a caveat there. But in terms of feeling guilty, people were pretty frank that they don't always live up to their values, and that convenience sometimes wins over feeling good that they gave their money to a company that they believe in and agree with. So the overwhelming response was that consumers care about company positions and behavior. They do their best, but at the end of the day, there are only so many hours, there are only so many dollars, and it is really hard to care about everything. And sometimes you just want some food or some coffee, whatever it is, and it's convenient. The things that people felt most guilty about actually had less to do with making purchases and more to do with things that your parents drilled into you when you were little about leaving the light on in an empty room. That was hands down the thing that people are most torn up about in terms of guilt. Throwing something that is recyclable in the trash, we seem to feel pretty guilty about, but we're unapologetic about eating meat.
interesting. And last question before we have to let you go. Using reusable bags, that's something that Albuquerque just passed a plastic bag ban. You have some interesting data with regard to people's behavior and actually reusing plastic bags when they go grocery shopping. Why don't you just discuss that for a second?
Yeah, what we found was that almost half the country is usually or always bringing plastic bags, but it's very, very lopsided. And states like California, where there are widespread, laws requiring merchants to charge a fee for store-provided bags, adoption is very, very high. Almost everybody always brings their bags. And in places where there's no economic incentive, people have been much, much slower to adopt reusable bag use. So that's one where without some kind of nudge or economic incentive, adoption has been pretty low, but the experience across the country would suggest that it's a habit we can all learn if we decide to.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. And your website is crestline.com. Is there an easy way for people? We'll create a link in the show notes, but is there
fantastic.
Easy way for folks to find more about your organization and your work on these kinds of issues?
Absolutely. We have a landing page with all of the methodology, a lot of the different things that we analyzed. If you go to crestline.com and look for consumer guilt and buying dilemmas, you'll find the page. But putting it in the show notes is incredibly helpful and much appreciated.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today. And folks,
it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.